Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ignatius Jean, the Executive Director of the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, and welcome to CAWASA webinar number 19 of 2025. This afternoon, we have our special guest is Mr. Terence Brouse, and he's the Inspector of Backflow Prevention in the Peel region in Canada. And he's going to present to us on the pandemonium breakout in backflow. Over to you, Terence.
Thank you, Ignatius.
Welcome to our webinar.
Thank you. All right, so I'll just get started then. So as you mentioned, my name's Terence Brouse. Just for to get started, telling you a bit about me. So I've been with Peel Region for almost 5 years now. I started as a sampling technician in our pollution control section, where I was responsible for taking wastewater samples of industrial effluent in support of our monitoring and surcharge programs, and was also responsible for wastewater surveillance in support of our COVID-19 response efforts. So about a year and a half ago, I started in my current role as an inspector for backflow prevention. And here I'm responsible for administering our temporary hydrant permit program, which provides companies with metered and backflow protected access to water from fire hydrants and for construction projects. And I also help support the region's backflow prevention and water bylaws by reviewing things like cross-connection surveys and test reports from all sorts of businesses and facilities within the region. Our team also responds to calls like water theft from hydrants and hydrant obstructions. So this presentation will probably be about 30 minutes long. We're going to cover an intro to backflow, cross connections, and types of backflow devices before moving on to some key areas of Peel Region's backflow prevention bylaw. And then finally, as you may be wondering, the namesake of this presentation, Panda. So this is our tool that we use to manage all of our data in the backflow department. All right, so what is backflow? So backflow is the flowing back or reversal of the normal direction of flow of water or any other substances into the potable water supply. So backflow can occur within a building, which poses a risk to the people inside, or between a building and a water distribution system, which puts the public as a whole at risk as everyone relies and trusts the distribution system to supply us with potable water. So why don't we want backflow? The reason we don't want backflow is because it allows contaminated or non-potable water to flow backwards into the drinking water system. So points in a plumbing system called cross connections can introduce pollution or contamination into the public water supply, which can create serious health risks and costly damage. So preventing backflow protects our drinking water, our infrastructure, and the community's safety. So backflow can happen in one of two ways, either conditions called back siphonage or back pressure. So back siphonage is the reversal of normal flow in a system caused by negative pressure in the supply piping. So factors that cause back siphonage, it's the result of upstream supply pressure being lower than downstream pressure. So this can occur when supply is interrupted, like during a water main break or a firefighting event. In cases of back siphonage, the downstream pressure would be considered normal and the upstream pressure would be considered low. Back pressure, on the other hand, is the reversal of the normal flow of water in a system due to increase in the downstream pressure above that of the normal supply pressure. So that can happen in one of two ways. The first is mechanical means, in which back pressure, where the water supply is connected to another system that's operating at a higher pressure. So for example, something like a booster pump or a boiler system or elevated piping downstream of the water supply that's at a higher pressure. Or thermal expansion, which can cause back pressure when water is heated. All right, so next, we have cross connections, which are points in a plumbing system that have to be isolated to prevent backflow. So cross connections are any actual or potential connection between a potable water system and any source of pollution or contamination. So common examples of this include something like a garden hose submerged in a pesticide mixture, a piped connection providing potable feed water to an industrial process like a cooling tower, or something like a submerged outlet of an irrigation system. So by identifying and protecting against cross connections through a cross connection survey, which I'll get into later, we're able to prevent contamination of the drinking water system before it happens and keep the water supply safe for everyone. So then we use backflow prevention devices to isolate cross connections from the potable water supply. We then use 3 types of isolation to protect against cross connections. The first being premise isolation. So premise isolation is backflow protection provided at the entrance to a building or facility. So premise isolation protects the water distribution system. It isolates the building as a whole from the water distribution system, but this doesn't protect against backflow within the building, which the other 2 types of isolation cover. So a backflow device for premise isolation would be installed on the main water service line or the fire service main. Zone isolation, on the other hand, is backflow protection provided at a section of water piping within a building or facility which only has non-potable connections downstream. So an example of this might be something like a laboratory wing in a hospital, which would isolate that lab area from the rest of the hospital's water system. Then finally, we have source isolation, and that's backflow protection provided at the water connection to a specific fixture or appliance within a building or facility. So source isolation is also known as fixture isolation, and it could be something like backflow protection on a boiler feed line or a hose bib. It's protection against individual plumbing fixtures. So moving on to the types of backflow preventers, there are testable and non-testable backflow prevention devices. Different types of devices are rated for different hazard levels, which are outlined in our backflow prevention bylaw and CSA standard, which I'll get into later in the presentation. So the first types we have are testable devices, and as the name suggests, they require annual testing by a qualified person. These 3 kinds are reduced pressure principle assemblies, double check valve assemblies, and pressure vacuum breakers. So reduced pressure principle assemblies, or RPs, are suitable for severe hazard cross connections. They protect against back pressure and back siphonage, and it includes 2 check valves and a relief valve that discharge water during a backflow event. A DCVA, or double check valve assembly, that's suitable for moderate hazard cross connections. It also protects against back pressure and back siphonage, and that just has 2 check valves in series, but no relief valve. A pressure vacuum breaker, or PVB, on the other hand, is suitable for severe hazards, but only protects against back siphonage. All right. So here's a more comprehensive list of backflow prevention devices. This includes non-testable ones as well, like atmospheric vacuum breakers, dual check valves, and laboratory faucet vacuum breakers, among others. So in the CSA B64 standard, each device is rated for a certain hazard level. If it's suitable for continuous pressure, if it protects against back siphonage and or back pressure. All right, so moving on to a bit about the history of backflow prevention in Ontario. Backflow prevention has been around for a long time, although there have been real incidences that have occurred which have put pressure on governments to implement backflow prevention legislation and bylaws at the provincial and municipal level. So some of these incidents have happened in Stratford, Guelph, and Oakville, involving car wash chemicals or petroleum backflow entering the system. And then some of the key drivers of backflow legislation have been the Safe Drinking Water Act in Ontario, which has mandated stronger protections for backflow protection, and the Ontario Building Code, which requires backflow devices in certain plumbing systems. And then in terms of municipal response, municipalities like us, Peel Region, Durham, and Toronto, among others, have launched their own formal backflow programs to protect the public water system at the municipal level. So I just wanted to quickly dive into one of the backflow incidents mentioned in the last slide. In Stratford, as it was a really important event which triggered backflow prevention being taken more seriously in Ontario. So in 2005, Stratford, a city in Ontario, faced a major water emergency when a car wash's cleaning chemicals, specifically it was called 2-butoxyethanol, entered the city's drinking water system. So residents noticed pink, frothy water coming from their taps, and the contamination affected around 30,000 people. It shut down schools and even led to canceled surgeries. So the root cause of this was a faulty valve and an unauthorized cross connection between the car wash and the city's water supply. So this incident really showed just how vulnerable our systems can be without the proper safeguards or backflow prevention. The business, the car wash who caused this, was fined under that previously mentioned Safe Drinking Water Act, and the city spent over $100,000 just in staff overtime to manage the crisis. So more importantly, though, it served as a wake-up call for municipalities across Ontario to take backflow prevention seriously, and it's a key reason why programs like PEELS exist today to prevent this kind of thing from happening again. So moving on from our quick rundown on our case study from Stratford and the basics of backflow, here's a quick overview on Peel Region as a whole and our team. So Peel Region consists of 3 municipalities: Mississauga, Brampton, and Caledon. The region has a population of over 1.5 million and is home to over 200,000 businesses. The region provides water and wastewater services to over 2 million people, as well as water services to some of York Region and Toronto. It covers over 1,200 acres of space, and it's a mix of rural and urban environments. We have the 2nd largest water wastewater utility in Ontario and the 3rd largest in Canada, and there's more than 10,000 kilometers of pipeline in the ground. So looking at our team specifically, so our backflow prevention team is within the water and wastewater operations division in the environmental control section. And our backflow prevention team consists of 1 supervisor, 1 specialist, 4 inspectors, 2 administrative assistants, and 1 student. So the Peel Region Backflow Prevention Bylaw 10-2017 has been in effect since April 1st, 2017. It applies to all industrial, commercial, and institutional facilities in Peel, as well as multi-residential buildings and single homes over 600 meters squared. In our bylaw as well, residential buildings of fewer than 3 stories are considered low-risk land and aren't subject to the requirements of the backflow prevention bylaw. So as I mentioned a few times briefly already, the region's backflow prevention bylaw makes reference to the CSA B6410 standard, which is the CSA standard for the selection and installation of backflow preventers, maintenance, and field testing of backflow preventers. So this is the national standard for backflow prevention and cross-connection control in Canada. Peel Region's backflow prevention bylaw is based on and references the CSA B64 standard to ensure consistent industry-accepted protection of the drinking water system. So this standard outlines things like device selection for various hazard levels, installation requirements, testing and maintenance, and it defines hazard classifications and isolation types. So the bylaw adopts and enforces these requirements, which ensures property owners comply with those CSA B64 and regional requirements. So in short, CSA sets these technical standards, but it isn't actually a bylaw itself, so it's not enforceable. So the region references these standards enforces these standards by referencing them in our bylaw. So the next important definition in our backflow prevention bylaw is the qualified person. And so this is a person authorized to undertake a task or duty under the authorized function list, which includes things like performing a cross-connection survey, installing or testing backflow devices, among other tasks. So qualified persons are logged in our qualified company registry. So any company doing cross-connection surveys or backflow device testing must register with Peel Region. That includes them giving us their company insurance, their plumbing license or professional engineering info for each individual, as well as the ASSE or OWWA, that's the American Society of Sanitary Engineering or Ontario Waterworks Association, cross-connection control specialist tester surveyor certificate, and a calibration report for all backflow preventer test kits. Qualified companies must send in renewal of all documents when they expire to remain on the registry. And we currently have 381 companies and 1,141 people on our qualified company and persons registry. So here's just a quick look at our application form for this qualified persons registry. As I mentioned, all the relevant insurance and certification information must be listed on this form. Once the information is verified by our admin team, they're added to the qualified persons registry. The only brief thing I'll mention here is this limitations and qualifications section on the bottom of the first page on the right. So as I mentioned, we have an authorized function list in our bylaw, which only allows people with certain certifications to perform certain authorized functions. So for example, a licensed plumber is authorized to repair, say, any backflow device, whereas a licensed steam fitter is only authorized to repair backflow devices in relation to heating and cooling systems. So the next major section of our bylaw covers cross-connection surveys. So a cross-connection survey is an inspection of a property's plumbing system to identify any potential or actual connections between the safe or potable drinking water supply and a non-potable source of contamination. So according to our bylaw, cross-connection surveys must be submitted every 3 or 5 years, depending on the hazard level. So that's every 3 years for severe hazard buildings and every 5 years for moderate hazard buildings. Once these cross-connection surveys are completed, they must be submitted within 14 days of completion. And cross-connection surveys and testing must be completed by the aforementioned qualified person on our region's qualified company or person registry. So here's just a quick look at our actual cross-connection survey forms. This first page is mostly administrative and it includes information like the surveyor and owner's name, address, date, etc. The tables below just act as a sort of checklist for common cross connections like premise isolation, fire systems, boilers, chemical feed systems, etc. And this second page here is more of the meat of the survey, and it's where the qualified person must list the location of any backflow prevention devices and cross connections, the degree of hazard, if acceptable protection is currently in place, as well as the type of backflow device, serial number, if it applies, and if upgrades are required. So this list could be something like a few items long for a facility like a warehouse used for dry storage to hundreds long for a facility like a hospital. So as mentioned on the cross-connection survey, each cross-connection will be identified with the corresponding hazard level. So hazard levels for specific cross-connections and premises are listed in the CSA B64 standard, which I'll show you in a second. So these hazard levels of cross-connections are identified by the qualified person as minor, moderate, or severe based upon the risk they pose to the drinking water system. Where there's a severe or moderate hazard building identified, which is most businesses, a minimum of 2 of the following shall be required: source isolation, zone isolation, or premise isolation. And then the appropriate model of backflow prevention device for protections shall be selected according to that identified hazard level. So hazard levels for specific point of use cross connections, as well as types of premises as a whole, are also listed in that CSA B64 standard. So these are the 3 hazard levels for cross connections as defined in our bylaw. So a minor hazard is any type of cross connection or potential cross connection that involves a substance that's only a nuisance and only results in changing the aesthetic qualities of the water. It isn't a risk to human health. A moderate hazard, meanwhile, is any type of cross connection that has a low probability of becoming a severe hazard. This includes connections involving water where the aesthetic qualities of the water have been reduced or under certain conditions can create a danger to health. And this differs from a severe hazard, which is any type of cross connection or potential cross connection involving water that has additives or substances that under any concentration can create a danger to health. So as I mentioned, this is the table in the CSA B64 standard, which acts as a guide for the degree of hazard for point of use cross connections. So if a plumber comes across a cross connection, they can take a look at this table and see what the severity is. So for example, an autoclave would be listed as severe, or something like an air compressor oil cooler is listed as moderate. The same goes for premises as a whole. So for example, an airport would be listed as a severe hazard facility and an amusement park would be listed as a moderate. So the last part of the bylaw we'll cover is testing requirements for backflow devices. So every device that can be tested must be tested by a qualified person under 3 conditions: when it's first installed, annually, whenever the device is cleaned, repaired, overhauled, or moved. And those test reports must be submitted to the region within 14 days of the test. and additional testing may be required if requested by the commissioner or in accordance with the CSA standards. Here's an example of our test report form. So what we do is we verify the information, all the administrative information on the test report form, like the qualified company, the person, backflow device test kit serial number, by cross-referencing our qualified person list that's hosted on Panda. It's ArcGIS-based software where we process all of our cross connections, surveys, and test reports. So we'll get into that in a sec, but obviously on the backflow device test report form, there's also space for all of the pressure readings from the test, hazard level, the type of isolation, etc. So moving on to Panda now, this is the homepage. This is the software that our backflow team uses to manage all of our data. So Panda stands for Protection, Activities, and Data Archives. This is developed in-house using ArcGIS and is integrated with SharePoint. So this tracks all of our cross-connection surveys, test reports, enforcement letters, and inspections. It enables flexible reporting so we can generate any metrics as needed. And then future plans include expanding public access for direct submission of forms. Right now, to populate all the data in our database, we receive PDF copies of test reports and cross-connection surveys, and our admin team types all the administrative info to import into Panda, but eventually we'd like to expand that. So it's just a form that allows all this information to get automatically generated so we can cut down on the administrative work. All right. So as I mentioned, this is our qualified companies and persons registry. So all the information, like I said, is uploaded and stored here in Panda. So when a company is in good standing with their certificate of insurance, certifications, and test kit calibrations up to date, they're denoted with that green circle, as you can see on Panda. When any of this documentation is set to expire, the green circle turns yellow, and that company is sent an email to remind them to send in updated copies of their documents. If a company allows their insurance, licenses, any of this documentation to expire, the circle turns red and they're sent an email saying they will be removed from our qualified persons list if they don't send updated documentation. So the qualified company list is published on the region's website, and it is in the company's best interest really to keep all their documentation up to date with us, as any delay could result in the loss of business on their end, as they won't be allowed to perform authorized functions within Peel region. This is our cross-connection survey and test report database on Panda. So every cross-connection survey and test report we receive through email is uploaded to Panda by our admin staff, so we can keep track and then respond to submissions. So as you can see on the bottom there, there's a separate tab for cross-connections and test reports, and all the relevant administrative info for each submission can be viewed on this page. So addresses, facility names, contact information, who performed the survey, the hazard level, etc. So as I mentioned, Panda is also integrated with SharePoint, where the actual PDF documents of the cross-connection surveys and test reports are stored. So this is just a quick look at the file structure for submissions that are for review. So we have different folders for some of our bigger clients, like school boards, some of the municipalities, the airport, for example, and we can view the actual test report and cross-connection survey documents through SharePoint. So once we receive a cross-connection survey or test report, we send out a letter to the property owner and the qualified company who performed the survey. So Panda has helped streamline this process through an automated response generation system. So how this works basically is staff will click on a submission in Panda to generate what's called a pre-populated ArcGIS Survey 123 response form. So these forms automatically include all the owner details, the qualified company, the address, hazard level, and other relevant data. And then there are specific review options. So when we receive these documents, we're either going to review and accept them, review and note them as incomplete, or review them with infractions. So we have a built-in infractions section that can be selected from a drop-down menu, which automatically inserts bylaw reference text into the letter. So this can be for common things like lack of premise isolation or an unprotected host connection. Other standard elements on the letter like sign-offs, contact emails, and formatting are automatically generated. And then once this is done, a PDF letter is automatically generated, which our admin team can send for mail out. So here's just a quick look at this form here. So as I mentioned, there's specific letter categories depending on the actual cross-connection survey. So let's just use an example that we're going to review one, and there's infractions. As I mentioned, all this information here, like the company name, mailing address, city, etc., is already pre-generated. And then we can actually generate our letter. So all the text here is already there. The header is always the same for a letter with infractions. We have the date in the top, the site address automatically pre-populated. We say our letter has been received and reviewed. And let's use the example of a letter in which there was an issue with the premise isolation and a soap dispenser. So we click on those two tabs and they automatically put this bylaw text or text referencing that your backflow prevention must meet CSA B64 standard, and it references specifically for soap dispenser and premise isolation. We also have some generic text for a footer saying it's the responsibility to ensure you hire a qualified person, etc., and a sign off with contact information in case the client wants to contact us or has any questions. So once a survey or test report is reviewed, we go in and update what's called the status of a submission. And this allows us to track whether an owner's cross-connection survey or test report was accepted or disqualified. So when letters are mailed out by our admin team, they also denote them as mailed out, which allows us to track the status of each submission and when it's been responded to. So this status tab really works as a tool for us to check which stage in the review process each cross-connection survey or test report is at. So here's just a quick look at what the final product of these response letters look like. This is an example for a test report response letter. So all the information is formatted and put on a region letterhead and is ready for mail out by our admin staff. So I just wanted to finish off quickly talking about a very recent and very Canadian case study regarding a backflow event within Peel region at a hockey arena. So this is an incident at a Mississauga hockey arena, and it was a clear example of why backflow prevention really is critical. So a heat exchanger broke and glycol from the ice freezing system started flowing into the hot water lines. So instead of reporting it immediately, the staff on site there tried to fix it themselves, which really delayed the proper response. There wasn't any backflow prevention in place for premise isolation or zone or source isolation, protecting the heat exchanger. So Peel Public Health was actually notified and they had to shut the facility down for like over a week to protect public safety. So our operations team also had to spend resources for several days sampling to ensure that the water distribution wasn't affected. And what's really concerning is that a cross-connection survey had been submitted 2 years earlier, flagged infractions by sending a response letter, which would have been generated on Panda, and gave the facility 90 days to correct them, but they didn't act. So only after being shut down did they hire a qualified company to install the necessary backflow devices. So it didn't, but had the glycol entered the distribution system, the consequences would have been much worse. And this case really reinforces the importance of backflow protection and reminds us that these proactive measures today really prevent emergencies tomorrow. So yeah, so thanks so much for having me and for your association's interest in Peel Region's backflow prevention program. It's been great sharing our experiences. Hopefully sparks some ideas for you guys or conversations as you explore or expand your own programs. And I really appreciate the opportunity to connect with all of you.
Right. Thank you so much, Terence, for this very comprehensive presentation. I trust that some of our colleagues on the call may have some questions for you. Please go ahead if anyone has any questions for Terence. Let me check the chat, see if there are any questions.
Hi, good day.
Yeah, Timothy.
Yes. Yes, Augustus here from Trinidad and Tobago, professional operator, and in this case, also a licensed plumber. Just wanted to find out, how do you tie in the clients or the building owners into ensuring that they do submit their cross connections and so on? Is it tied into the insurance so that they must have that's when they come in to pay the insurance and so on that they would have to
so
submit the other documents?
Yeah, so you're basically saying, like, how do we get every company to actually show us that they're complying? So our bylaw is kind of still in its infancy, even though it's been 2017. Some of these regional bylaws have been around a lot later. I've only been with the team for a year and a half, but as far as I understand, our public works department had addresses on file, and we sent out basically mass letters when the bylaw started saying, okay, this bylaw is new. Here's some general information about it. You have this much time to complete a cross-connection survey. Honestly, like, we're still kind of at a stage where our team can't handle all the volume. I mentioned we have over 200,000 businesses here. So we kind of are at the stage where we're just working on companies that are self-submitting stuff right now. Although as our team grows, we're actually going to be going out in the field, and this is also integrated in Panda. It's called this like tile system we have to go to certain businesses and add them individually to our program. So we have everything on file and can actually send out more alerts that they need to comply.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other questions? Questions now, it's your time to, if you have any. I don't know how many of you deal with backflow in your utilities, but we'd like to thank you very much, Terence, and of course, Valerie, for making contact with your colleague who had presented to us from Peel I think about a month ago. And so it's a good association to have. So thank you very much for that presentation, of course. Oh, there is a question in the chat. Who is responsible to keep backflow devices in working order?
So it's the responsibility of the owner to hire qualified persons on our list to keep those devices in order, and they have to be tested every year according to our bylaw. So we receive the test report forms and review them and accept them, but it's ultimately up to the owner themselves.
Okay. Any others? Right, there's another question here. It says, from Hugo Rancharan of Belize Water Services. In the incident mentioned, was it glycol, and what tests are carried out to determine the extent of the contamination?
It was our operations team that did the testing. I can't speak to the exact laboratory test they would have conducted. I think it was probably something like VOCs as part of it. But again, that's another department that actually does the testing. And I'm just seeing this other question: if tested and certified and there's backflow event, can the owner be held liable? Ultimately, I would say, like, if a device has been tested, if they're in compliance and a backflow event occurs, I would lean to say they're probably not going to be held liable, because ultimately we can't prevent backflow itself. If they need to be tested once a year and a backflow device breaks every 6 months, that owner still met their requirements. And obviously some things just slip through the cracks. It's unfortunate, but as long as we have proof that an owner is following the bylaw, I wouldn't think they would be held liable.
Yeah, I can say that from Terence. I don't know if you can hear me. But for my house, I get a letter every year from the municipality, and I have to have a certified professional come in and test my backflow, and they have to submit a report to the municipality. Otherwise, I am liable to a fine.
Yeah. So like I said, as long as you perform that duty, like, you're covering yourself. And
I've just finished with Anthony, and he says to say hi. We're at the CWWA convention in Victoria.
Oh,
so he said
cool.
to say hello.
Hello.
Okay. Any other interventions, questions, comments? Yes, there's another, who I think, which was the thing here?
So
Who
who
determines
determines?
what
Sorry, yeah.
type of backflow protection device is needed dependent on the business applying for it?
So when a business has a cross connection survey performed by a qualified company or person, they'll identify all of the different cross connections and identify a hazard level for the whole facility. So let's just say, for example, like this is a hospital. A hospital has all sorts of severe cross connections. That facility would be considered a severe hazard, and that corresponds in the CSA B64 standard, which is referenced in the bylaw, to prescribe certain backflow devices. So the premise isolation for a hospital, which is a severe hazard, would need a reduced pressure principle device. And then certain cross connections within the building, depending whether they're moderate or severe, would need devices suited for that hazard. So a moderate hazard within the building would require something like a DCVA perhaps, or something like a trap seal primer would need an atmospheric vacuum breaker for as a severe hazard. So again, it's determined by the qualified person kind of in conjunction with the requirements of the CSA standard. So then when a cross-connection survey is received by us, what we do is we also review it to see if there's any sort of glaring errors, like if a facility like a hospital was rated by the qualified person as a moderate hazard, which we know it isn't, we would send that back for the qualified company to redo it.
Yeah, the questions are coming fast and furious now.
So if the device fails before the annual inspection, what actions are taken place? So if it's known that it fails, like the thing, so with a reduced pressure principle assembly, you might know it's failing because it has a relief valve and it might be leaking. And if that's documented and there's proof of it, it needs to be fixed. Whereas like there's other devices like a dual check valve assembly, which unless you test it, you don't really know if it's working or not because it's all internal. So you wouldn't even know if it's working or not between those yearly inspections.
Next question, any?
Hi, again, Augustus here again.
Yeah,
Just give me a little bit more explanation on the siphonage. I know in when it comes to wastewater plants, you know, some operators like to put a potable water hose to try to clear a blockage or something and figure that you could have some issues there.
Yeah, that's kind of like the classic back siphonage situation. So in that case, for any like if you're using a hose, the easiest thing is to just put a hose connection vacuum breaker on the actual hose bib, and they're pretty cheap, like $15, $20. So it's an easy solution. And the hose connection vacuums in the updated standard are also rated for severe hazard. So they're good in any scenario.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. We don't seem to have any others at this stage. So thanks again, Terence, for a very comprehensive presentation and seem to have generated quite a number of questions for you and
Yeah,
for
no
which you were
problem.
well prepared. Right.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank Valerie for always getting us the contacts for these presentations. So until we meet again, I'm Ignatius Jean, the Executive Director at the Caribbean Water and Sewage Association, CAWASA, as we end today's webinar number 19 of 2025. And look out for us again in another week. Just as we're at it, as I wrap up, I know that a number of our teams are getting ready to support the recovery effort in Jamaica as they were afflicted by the hurricane, a Category 5 Melissa last week. And so the assessments are ongoing, and CAWASA, the TWWA, UNICEF, OWB, and a lot of other teams are collaborating with the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency in bringing relief and response to our brethren and comrades in Jamaica. So let's just bear them in mind, and any way we can assist, we will keep you posted with what's going on. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. I'm signing off. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terence. Thanks, Ignatius. Take care.